All right, well, we'll let people sort of wander in as we go here, but we're gonna start pretty quickly with a modified mock match. So I just wanted to say a quick welcome, introduce a couple of people and get our day off and rolling. So first of all, thank you to all of you for coming. This is, I think, our third year of a virtual Ethics Bowl summer workshop. No, fourth year. And is that right? 2021, yeah. 2021, 22, 23, fourth year, right? Yeah. And we had a huge crowd in our first year because that was 2020. So we were just a few months into the pandemic and everybody didn't know what the heck was going on. And so we all had to learn together. We had 116 people that year. And then the year after that, we had 65 people. Last year, we had 75 people. And this year, we're above 80 people in terms of registered for the workshop. So we're loving the fact that despite people being used to being in the virtual environment, our population of workshop attendees is growing rather than shrinking, which is awesome. So we're looking forward to keeping developing the summer workshop and even looking at some hybrid options as we go forward if there's significant interest, because it's always nice to be able to get some people together just to have those impromptu conversations. But it's great to be able to have such a large crowd across several time zones. My name is John Garcia. I'm the outgoing chair of the Association of Practical and Professional Ethics' Intercollegiate Ethics Bowl Council. And just to my right on the screen is Michael Jordan, who's the incoming chair of that same council. And just to his right is Kristen Fuse-Wells, the executive director of API. And just to her right is Alex Richardson, director of the National High School Ethics Bowl. And the person who you could just see the top of his head as he walked by is Richard Green, the previous chair of the Ethics Bowl Council. So thanks to Michael, Kristen, Alex, Richard, and some others who helped put this weekend together. I'm going to turn it over here to Kristen and Alex, who are going to be leading our first session. And that's going to be a modified match between that's sort of going to show ways that the high school and the college models are similar but a little bit different. And this will be the link that we use for the whole day. So you're certainly welcome to come and go as you need. And if you want to just remain in the room, you can always just turn off your camera and your microphone if you need to step out. We will have waiting rooms set up between sessions. So if you do actually sort of log off, you'll have to come back through the waiting room. But otherwise, if you need to step away, you can just do what Will Parker and Mona are doing and turn your camera and mic off and come back when you need. With that, let me turn it over to Kristen and Alex.
Thanks, John. Thanks everybody for being here. We really appreciate it. We're excited to have all of us together in this virtual format. Since John kind of did my introduction for me, we wanted to start off with a mock round, as he said, that merged the goals and the formats of the collegiate and the high school version. So that's what you're going to see today. Since our time is abbreviated, we're just going to do a modified half round. And that's going to leave us some time at the end of the session for an engaging discussion about Ethics Bowl as we kick off the next 2 days together. So before we get to the mock round, Alex, I thought it might be helpful just to review what exactly Ethics Bowl is, and especially for those who are new to Ethics Bowl, what the format is. So bear with me, and I'm going to share my screen and just do a quick PowerPoint for us all. Okay. Can everybody see that okay? Okay, so first off, we just have a slide to talk about what Ethics Bowl is. And besides reading this, what I would love to see in the chat perhaps is from all of you, what makes Ethics Bowl exciting? What makes it different? I would love for you guys to just take a couple of seconds and share some phrases or some words, some thoughts about why you get excited about Ethics Bowl, why you participate, and maybe even perhaps why you're excited to get involved with Ethics Bowl. So I'll give you a couple of minutes, drop some things in the chat. Empowering, love it. I like that too. There's thinking going on, right? We've heard this phrase, for those of you who are new, we were doing some question and answer and this deliberate decision making. We've been using that phrase. Your coaches, awesome. Great. I know we all come to this from different places. We've been involved for different amounts of time. I love it. I actually learned about Ethics Bowl as a judge at Prindle Institute before I joined APPE, but it is one of the reasons I wanted to work at APPE. I was really excited about what I saw from high school students at that time. So like I said, Alex and I are going to help walk you through a mock round, and just that we're all on the same page, this is what that round typically looks like in a full version. We have the moderator period, we have the presentation period, the commentary period, the response period, and then the judges period. So just as a reminder, we'll start with the moderator introducing a case and reading a question, and then the match will begin. That's the presentation period. So team A will do their presentation to the question that was just presented. Then next is the commentary period. That's the time where the second team offers questions about the first team's argument. In between these times, obviously each team has conferral times as well. So we'll go through that. And then the response period, team A responds to team B's questions. And finally, we have the judges period where the judges ask the students questions, invite them to clarify or expand upon their presentation. We also just wanted to share with you some examples of the timing and how they differ between the APPE IEB and the National High School Ethics Bowl. So you can see on here, the total time period is 40 minutes with the different time allowances. And I'll just give you a couple of seconds to look that over, and then we're going to switch over to the National High School Ethics Bowl so that you can see that, which is a total of 35 minutes, a little more time to confer, a little shorter presentation periods. And then Alex has put together a little document that overviews the scoring criteria. So if you want to use this QR code or go to the link provided there, that will just, as we're going through this, help you understand the different scoring mechanisms for the two different versions. And Alex, you unmuted, so go for it.
Well, I was just going to say, I was going to issue a slight challenge.
Okay.
For those of you either who are new to Ethics Bowl or who have been around for a while you're going through this round or half round, I suppose, I encourage you to take a look at those scoring criteria, because one of the places I'd like to start our discussion afterwards is on the extent to which either of our teams who are presenting today are actually pursuing those goals, right? That's not to say that you should be scoring and judging in the background, but in lieu of a judging period for this mock round, I'm going to turn things over to the audience at the end so we can talk a little bit about what we've just seen and hopefully do that in kind of a systematized way. So do be looking at those scoring criteria and listening closely to what our students have to offer, because we're going to dig in hopefully not to their surprise afterwards. So with that, I'll give things back to Kristen, and we're going to run a little mock round just so you can see a bit of what Ethics Bowl is all about.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, so I will ask, if you're not participating in the mock round, if you would mute your audio, make sure that's muted, and turn off your camera until we're finished. That way we can spotlight the students really well. And then once that round is over, we'll be sure to get you guys back involved with your cameras on if you feel like it. So I would like to welcome our teams from DePauw University and the University of North Carolina. So I'm just going to run this as we would typically run, right, a virtual match. So I'm Kristen Fuss-Wells, and I'll serve as your moderator today. There are no judges in this modified match, so we'll just start by having each of the teams introduce themselves. DePauw, why don't you start for us?
All right, hello, I'm Alex. I'm a rising sophomore at DePauw.
I'm Bodie. I'm a rising junior at DePauw.
And I'm Hajan. I'm a rising senior at DePauw.
Thank you. And UNC.
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm a grad student at UNC.
Hey everyone, my name is Elijah and I'm a rising junior at UNC.
And my name is Austin and I just graduated from Chapel Hill.
Great, that's all of our team members, correct? Okay, so it has already been determined that DePauw will be team 1 and will be serving as the presenting team, so no coin flip is needed. for this modified matchup, we're using the case called Happy the Elephant from last year's regional case sets for both APPI, IEB, and NHSEB. If you're following online, I'm going to put this in the chat where you can read along, and it is case 2 in our regional case set. So team 1, I'll read the question aloud, and then I'm going to post it in the chat. You'll then have a 3-minute conferral time. I'm going to pull up my timer. So your question, if we supposed that Happy possesses capacities sufficient for moral personhood, should that status entail a corresponding legal personhood? Why or why not? Again, I'll post it in the chat. Okay, and your 3 minutes will begin now. One minute remaining. Okay, your time is up. Okay, team A, you now have 5 minutes for your presentation. I will place a 3-minute and a 1-minute warning in the chat. Would you also like me to provide it verbally?
Yeah, please.
Okay. All right, your time begins now.
All right, in response to the question, DePaul contends that Happy should not be granted legal personhood, but that we still have moral obligations toward her. For a little bit of context, Happy the Elephant was heard in the New York Court of Appeals after an extended solitary confinement at the Bronx Zoo. And the trial was about whether or not she should be granted habeas corpus, which is the right to avoid an unlawful detention or solitary confinement, and thus whether or not Happy should be considered a legal person. We considered a lot of different issues, ethical issues in this case, some of which pertaining to the meaning of personhood and how it affects other animals, animal rights, and the difference between legality and morality. My colleague Bodhi will introduce arguments in support of our position, and then my colleague Hajan will introduce some counter arguments and address them.
Yeah, DePaul would first like to argue that legal personhood is unnecessary in Happy's case for practical reasons. Just a straightforward utilitarian approach to the situation shows that while we concede that personhood would provide protections that current animal rights laws and practices would not provide Happy, it comes with unexpected consequences. Granting Happy legal personhood would grant it the benefits without the obligations of personhood. You can imagine the scenario of if Happy were a legal person, someone could pursue a lawsuit against it. And of course, an elephant cannot represent itself in court. You could imagine a scenario where someone would represent it on its behalf, but really, we think that shows that personhood is not the best way to capture the concerns here. It will never be Happy acting for itself in ways that require a person as a concept, when in fact could already be covered by existing legal actions. And to that extent, especially since we consider that the harm it's undergoing seems to be emotional in nature due to isolation, we think we have obligations to help it, but there are more effective means of doing so, such as lawsuits against the zoo, or even legal action just on a local scale from where it's being held in the zoo. But ultimately, personhood stands the risk of introducing incoherence into the legal system, putting human persons at risk, and ultimately is an unnecessary jump to protect Happy.
However, we understand that there may be some concerns with the argument that we have put forward, primarily two. The first argument being that if Happy possesses capacity sufficient for moral personhood, similar to a human per se, shouldn't she be granted legal personhood as well? And to that, our position is that the concept of personhood is a very fraught one, and regardless of whether or not she has the same traits that qualify her for moral personhood the same way that a human does, by virtue of being a member of the human species, we would like to say that we'd like to reiterate what my colleague Bodhi mentioned before, which is that legal personhood does not need to be granted to Happy in order to fulfill the goals that advocates for Happy's legal personhood are hoping to work towards. The other argument that we would like to address is the idea that Happy does not have or does not deserve any of our moral considerations, given that she does not possess the same capacities. Given that she does not possess the status of legal personhood that would grant her, they'll put her under our moral obligations. To which we state that we believe that regardless of whether or not she has legal personhood or is a person in general, we still have moral obligations to prevent her suffering, just based on the fact that she has the capacity to experience it in her isolation. In summary, DePaul contends that we believe that legal personhood should not be granted to Happy. However, Happy still deserves our moral considerations and that we have moral obligations to prevent her suffering. Thank you, and we look forward to the commentary.
Thank you. Team 2, you now have 3 minutes for conferral. I will give you a 1-minute warning. Your time begins now.
Is there a breakout room for the three of us?
I think Alex is going to get you in one. Yep. I'll wait till you get in the breakout room and then I'll start your 3 minutes.
Yep. All right, you can start the timer now.
Okay, we're all back. So team 2, you now have 3 minutes for your commentary. I'll place a 1-minute warning in the chat. Would you also like it verbally?
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, your time begins now.
We just want to say thank you to the moderators for hosting this event. Thank you to DePaul. I think that was a very interesting presentation, and I think we have a lot of points of agreement with your general position, but we would just want to take a little time to dive a little deeper into your position. So summarizing the question, it was, suppose that Happy Elephant has moral personhood. Does that imply legal personhood? I think you all gave a really nice discussion of legal personhood, but I want to hear a little bit more about this issue of moral personhood. In particular, what do you think would be a conception of moral personhood that would include Happy? And what might be some of the ramifications of defining moral personhood in such a manner?
Yes, and we generally agreed with you, legal personhood might be a little too far to give to an elephant just because of all of the unexpected consequences that it might cause. But you do owe them some aspect of treating Happy morally. We kind of wanted to know, to what extent do you believe Happy should be treated? There's a lot of argument that goes around, the treatment of animals in zoos. If we treat them, depending on how we qualify them as a moral person, whether or not they are a legal person, it seems like there's a lot of different avenues that you can take. You can take the avenue of we don't think zoos are a very moral thing. So not only should Happy not be kept in solitary, but she should be returned to the wild. Or, this then brings up a good argument around pets. And can we own an animal if we treat them as a moral person? So we were just kind of wondering, where would you guys stand on just to what extent Happy should be treated in this moral aspect?
Yeah, and the questions that Austin and Elijah bring up are two central ones, but I just wanted to point to the question for the question posed to all of us and my specific question. So the question asks you to elaborate why or why not capacity sufficient for moral personhood might entail or not entail corresponding legal personhood, and we would just love more elaboration on that why or why not aspect of the question.
1 minute.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think we'll yield the rest of our time.
Thank you. Okay, team 1, you now have 3 minutes for conferral. I will begin your time now. One minute. That's time. Okay, team one, you now have 3 minutes to respond to team two's commentary. I'll place a 1-minute warning in the chat and also provide it verbally. Your time begins now.
Thank you very much, UNC, for your questions and commentary on our case. We understood that you generally agreed with our position, but had 2 central questions and wanted us to elaborate on the connection between moral personhood and legal personhood. My colleagues will take it away and start answering more questions and elaborating on moral personhood.
Yeah, for the first question you asked about, well, the first 2 questions really about what status moral personhood happy may kind of be captured by, and what the obligations we have to happy in situations like happy are. We stand by that definitions of moral personhood are fundamentally tricky, and they leave out some entities that we may want to include. But we think ultimately that in the case of happy, it's not a situation where we need to provide a perfect definition to capture its worth. And in fact, its obligations stem more and are related more to what our specific obligation, or our obligations to it specifically are related more to its capacities for meaningful suffering. As in this situation where it appears to be suffering from loneliness, we might not feel that way to like a bacterium or something, but because it appears to have this specific emotional capacity that allows it to suffer, that shapes our obligations to it and makes its suffering meaningful more so than any definition of personhood.
In response to your question asking us to elaborate on the relationship between moral personhood and legal personhood, as my colleague Bodie mentioned in his main argument, we do not believe that while happy may fulfill the capacities that have the status of moral personhood, that automatically translates to happy being granted legal personhood. And the main reason for that is that while happy may be able to fulfill certain criterion for moral personhood, fundamentally happy lacks the rational capacity to act in the legal realm in the same way that somebody with full legal personhood would be able to. In addition to that, there are certain legal practicalities that could be complicated by granting happy a non-human entity legal personhood. And for those reasons, we believe that happy's moral personhood does not automatically guarantee her legal personhood, or should not automatically guarantee her legal personhood.
And with that, we'll yield the rest of our time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, both teams. Now we would normally move to the judges Q&A at this time, but I'm going to hand it over to Alex Richardson to lead us all in a facilitated conversation that goes beyond asking questions of the presenting team and scoring. First, though, I'd like to encourage you all to turn your video cameras back on if you would and join us. And let's all give
Yes, please do that.
A round of applause for joining us today and preparing for today's case, especially on their summer break. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, great. So yeah, I wanted to get us started by saying that I think that this little snippet, we'll have a whole session later this weekend on the sort of core values and skills at the core of Ethics Bowl. But I think that this little snippet really well exemplified one particular thing that separates the Ethics Bowl activity from something like speech and debate, in that it was incredibly non-adversarial. Right. And the further thing that I would point out is that the teams agreed on the essentials, and yet a productive and useful conversation followed anyway. Right. This is something that we see quite often in Ethics Bowl that we don't often see in other formats. So those couple of sort of general remarks aside, I want to open the floor now for some kind of metagaming, right? To think about the extent to which what we've seen, apart from numerical scores, but I'm inviting evaluations of a more qualitative sort, about the extent to what we've seen sort of conforms to and matches up with some of the scoring criteria that we've shared with you all. And just to have that fresh, I'm going to drop that in the chat one more time. But if there are particular things that you'd like to point out or things that you'd like to ask questions about on any of those criteria scored, please feel free to do so now. I mean, one particular thing I might ask about, right, is the extent to which you thought that conversation actually advanced. Like, so did that conversation advance your understanding of like the requisite issues? So say on one hand, a legal conception of personhood that entitles to someone or something to legal representation, to advocacy, that sort of thing, as opposed to a moral conception of personhood that may imply different demands. I mean, teams, do you think that went anywhere? Sorry, Michael, you want to go ahead?
Oh yeah, just to speak to the question that you brought up. I thought that the teams did a good job, zeroing in on the issue of personhood as, what the question asked for, but also really the key issue here. What I think, and I think this is part of what the back and forth between the teams was getting to also, but what I was hoping to hear a little bit more of is a distinction between what personhood means in a moral context and what it means in a legal context, just in not even in terms of parsing that out in a debate, but even just the individual teams explaining briefly what they take those to be, right? So like I think it was in the commentary that Team A said that they take legal personhood to imply a certain capacity for reason, right? And which I thought was a good point to make, and maybe a contentious point, but something that maybe could have been expanded on a little more.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think this is actually like a prototypical judge's question, right? So for those of you who are new to this format, in both the case of the Intercollegiate Bowl and the High School Bowl, what would follow this in a half of a match is a 10-minute sort of Q&A period with a panel of 3 judges and the participating team. So Michael could have gone first in the judges Q&A right there and asked a particular question about the sort of conceptual work that's going into these competing, you might say, ideas about personhood, right? So the idea is not necessarily that that all the ground is tilled in the presentations, particularly on the high school side. They've got 5 minutes. In the collegiate side, they've got 10, right? These issues are all designed and portrayed through a series of case studies such that they are not exhaustible in that amount of time, right? But the judge's role, of course, is always to sort of deepen, expand, and we hope constructively kind of extend arguments. So Suzanne, I saw your hand as well.
Okay, I had a question regarding I suppose the quality of the argumentation. So in the introductions of each team member, I did recall Austin saying he's a biology major. I'm not sure if the others introduced themselves in terms of their areas of expertise, but as an audience member, I don't want to say a judge. When the students say, I am so-and-so and I'm a geography major, when they reveal their areas of expertise, does that have any bearing on the sort of quality of argumentation that will ensue?
It shouldn't. I mean, I think so. Something that's core, and again, we'll have a broader conversation about the values of the bowl and to what extent, like particular disciplinary expertise figures, right? Particularly in philosophy, since both ethics bowl programs are outgrowths of the discipline of professional philosophy. But it shouldn't, right? I think the core message here, right, is that ethics is for everyone and ethics is doable by everyone, right? That's not to say that there's not differential expertise, but I think that like deferring to one undergraduate's bachelor's degree in a particular area does not exhaust the territory of chasing down this question, right? So I mean, I think like I would answer that in a sort of non-committal way, Suzanne, and say that like of course, like we want, I mean, this is probably why you want a diversity of students on your teams, right? You want folks who aren't just philosophers, right? You want folks who aren't in all the same classes together. You want folks who are going to bring different kinds of presuppositions and frameworks and things like that to the table. But that's not to say that any one of them runs the table on ethical inquiry. John, you're the boss. You don't have to raise your hand.
Okay, well, my question was more of a follow-up to what Michael had said. One thing that I kind of like as a coach and as a judge is when a team might answer the question posed, but then sort of almost pause to say, this is what makes this hard. You know, we need to start by teasing out this distinction between moral personhood and legal personhood, sort of setting up the problem a little more in depth. And I noticed that most teams don't do that. They just sort of jump into the argument. So I'm curious what people think about that idea, because I'm open to the idea that I'm a weirdo that just has, you know, preferences that no one else shares. So yeah, I'm just curious what people think about this sort of idea. Often when I coach teams, I actually have them put the objections before their argument instead at the end as a way of getting at this. This is what makes this complicated and difficult. So I'm just sort of curious about people's point of view on that.
Actually, I might jump in a little bit. One of the things that I think is really important oftentimes, especially with cases like this, especially with, like, you know, Happy the Elephant, is really trying to lay out, why should I care about this issue? Why is this issue fundamentally important? Why is it an ethical issue that we ought to be talking about and pushing forward? And in fact, taking a position on. So I oftentimes start with my students about really trying to get them to think about the importance from an ethical perspective of, why are we talking about this case? And I see a lot of teams oftentimes, as John said, will just jump right into the argument and they'll miss that part of it, of why we should really care about this. And so oftentimes I think that we need to come back to that.
Okay, McGuire.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's important. I'm going to coach my ethics bowl team for the first time this fall. And so that's, first of all, just really useful to kind of conceptualize. But I think one of the interesting things, I've judged 2 competitions now, that I think is towards this point, is that also to even phrase, like, I don't know, I'm not happy when they don't answer the question, but to phrase the question in such a way to rephrase it that actually points to this very issue. So, like, if I judged here, one of my questions would have been, what kind of role does moral personhood have on our distinctly legal obligations? Right? Like the teams kept the delineation very, very clear. And it seems like the whole point is that it's not very clear. So yeah, so I think this makes a lot of sense. And it is something that I think people often wait till the judging round to start to explore.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that, like, and teams approach this different ways. I mean, as Richard said earlier in our sort of pre-session, right? I don't think there's any one, like, super obviously right way to do this. But I mean, I tend to observe the regularity that John points out, right? That there's not a lot of this groundwork laying before a team jumps into sort of, here are our reasons for thinking X, right? So I mean, I think that, like, it's incumbent upon judges, right, to bring those things out. This is what the role of the good judges, and it's why something like training is important for judges. So yeah, I mean, I think these are all important things that are missing, right? And I mean, maybe not missing, but, like, these are different ways of doing a good presentation.
Alex, we have a question in the chat from Dorothy
Okay.
about a former NHSEB participant used to the guiding questions in the set. Maybe this is something we open up to the group, but how would they navigate a case if they're used to that question set?
Well, I mean, I can speak to this from my own sort of quarter here, but I also defer. There's a lot of people with a lot more IEB coaching experience than me in the room. But I would point to Michael's point from a few minutes ago, which is to really start with, why is this important? Why is this not obvious, right? What does this issue mean to me? What are its implications for others, right? Like, and then not just in a superficial, like, who are the stakeholders affected, but in a, like, why should we care sort of framing. So I see Ron and then Michael. So I think Ron may have, like, come up first by, like, a second. So I'll go to Ron first. I don't want to start anything here, but I'll take a guess and go to Ron.
Okay, just real quick, I have my team generate their own questions. I mean, after we talk about what's significant about the case, I send them away and have them generate lists of questions that they think might come up with, and then we talk about those and whittle it down. And then when we're practicing, I give them back the questions that they've given me. Sometimes a little modification, but generally, that tends to work pretty well because they know what's weird about the case. So.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, something that I've been doing that I actually picked up from one of my former colleagues who used to be a co-coach with me, is when we first start looking at the case set, I ask my students for each case to come up with what we call a central ethical tension, which is in some ways just another way of saying central moral dilemma that is listed on the scoring sheet. But the idea is to find in the case values, right, or risks that are in tension, right? And I think that's a good way of getting at what is at stake, right, in the case. And I think that's sort of the same thing that the study questions at the high school level try to get to also, right?
Yep. Good. Kristen, are we running low on time?
Yep, I
Okay,
think we're out of time.
Kristen, this is the part where you as the moderator say, that's time, shut up. Okay, so again, I mean, thanks for these good questions. As I pointed out earlier, like we haven't tilled the ground of this issue, right? Or in fact, of even all of the sort of metagaming things that we could say about like that brief exchange. But I think like what's important is that we're zeroing in on the fact that like there's not a single like right way to approach a case, not a single right way to do this activity, but there are important kind of value through lines through each, right? And that's what is attempted to be expressed, right? As you might guess, like evaluating activities like this is hard, right? The idea of sort of rendering competitive a conversation that is otherwise supposed to be deliberative, right, is kind of a tension. But what you see in those scoring documents is an attempt to, if not numericize, at least make valuable and commensurate the types of questions that this crowd has been raising. So I think I'll leave things there. John, are we going to take a break before the next session, or are we going right in? Or
we'll take a break. Next session starts at 1 o'clock Eastern time. So if you